Picture this. You're sitting in a lawyer's office watching your own parents, the people who taught you right from wrong, sign a legal document with trembling hands. My father looked up at me, his voice cracking, and said the 5 words I never thought I'd hear. "We didn't think you'd care." But here's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't ask permission. And what I did next? Let's just say my mother called me ruthless, my brother called me heartless, my lawyer called me brilliant. Stick around because you're about to find out what happens when the family doormat gets up, dusts herself off, and hires an attorney. Before we dive into what happened next, let me ask you something. Have you ever been the responsible one in your family? The person everyone leans on but nobody protects? If that hits close to home, hit that like button. Let's build a community of people who refuse to be doormats. Subscribe and turn on notifications because, trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. And drop a comment. Where are you watching from? And have you ever had family cross a line they couldn't uncross? Let's talk about it. They say blood is thicker than water. What they don't tell you is that blood also makes for terrible collateral. My name is Evelyn Hugo, and if you saw me walking into a boardroom, tailored navy suit, leather portfolio, that controlled smile that says, "I've read your quarterly report and I'm not impressed," you'd probably think I had it all figured out. At 36, I'm a corporate strategy consultant. I negotiate million-dollar mergers before lunch and dismantle hostile takeovers by dinner. I've built a career on pattern recognition, spotting the red flags, protecting the assets, calling the bluffs. But somehow, I completely missed the heist happening in my own driveway. Let me tell you about my brother George. 29 years old, movie star jawline, and the financial instincts of a golden retriever at a poker table. While I was pulling all-nighters for my Wharton MBA, George was finding himself in Bali on mom and dad's credit card. While I was building client portfolios, George was building a TikTok following. His greatest hits include a Korean barbecue food truck that never left the driveway, a dating app for pet owners that never got past the logo design, and his personal Everest, day trading cryptocurrency with the confidence of someone who'd watched 3 YouTube videos. Our parents? Oh, they perfected the art of what I call selective accountability. Every time George face-planted into another disaster, they'd swoop in like financial superheroes. Every time I succeeded, they'd pat themselves on the back for raising such a responsible daughter. Translation, I was the safety net, and George was the trapeze artist who never learned to check if the net was there. But the Porsche? That was mine. That was the line. 4 years ago, I found her in a barn in upstate Pennsylvania, a 1969 Porsche 911S, Bahama yellow, buried under old tarps and broken dreams. The owner had passed away, and his widow was selling off his unfinished projects. When I saw that car, dusty and forgotten, something clicked. Maybe I saw myself in it. Maybe I just needed something that was entirely, unapologetically mine. I paid $38,000 and made the widow a promise. I'll bring her back. And I did. Every Saturday morning for 4 years, I'd drive out to my garage, not the garage at my parents' house, mind you, but my own climate-controlled sanctuary with a thermos of coffee and a Springsteen playlist. I taught myself to rebuild a flat-six engine by watching German restoration videos at 2 a.m. I sourced original parts from collectors in Stuttgart. I learned the difference between Irish green and Bahama yellow under natural light because the paint code had faded. I bled on that car. I cried over that car when a gasket wouldn't seal. I poured $107,000 and 1,000 hours into that car. When she finally purred to life, smooth as butter, gleaming like a golden dream, she was appraised at $145,000. But if you had offered me $1 million for her, I'd have laughed you out of the room. She wasn't an investment. She was proof that I could take something broken and make it whole. Then Singapore called. My firm was closing a merger with a Southeast Asian tech conglomerate. $300 million on the table. If I pulled it off, I'd make partner before 40, the youngest in the firm's history. I'd be gone for 3 weeks, maybe 4. I kissed the Porsche's hood, yes, I'm that person, set the alarm system, locked the garage, and texted my parents, Off to Singapore. See you when I'm rich and jet-lagged. Don't burn down the house. I should have texted, touch my car, and I'll prosecute. Because here's what nobody tells you about being the successful sibling in a family of takers. Your wins become communal property, your boundaries become suggestions, and your 4-year labor of love, that becomes collateral for someone else's crisis. I was 8,000 miles away, shaking hands with executives in a glass tower overlooking Marina Bay when my phone buzzed with a message that would change everything. From Natasha, my business partner. Evelyn, I stopped by to water your plants. Your garage door is wide open. The Porsche is gone. Should I call the police? My blood turned to ice. For exactly 4 seconds, I thought, carjacking, professional theft, insurance claim. Then my phone buzzed again. A photo. The garage door wasn't forced open. The alarm panel was disarmed, and sitting on my workbench, right where I'd left my spare key for emergencies, was an empty hook. This wasn't a burglary. This was family. And what happened next? Well, let's just say I didn't build a career on negotiation by rolling over and playing dead. Stick with me, because you're about to find out what happens when the family doormat gets up, dusts herself off, and hires an attorney. Growing up, George and I were like 2 kids handed the same box of Legos with wildly different instruction manuals. I built according to the plan, brick by brick, foundation first, check your work twice. George, he dumped the whole box on the floor, announced he was building a spaceship castle restaurant, get bored halfway through, and wander off to watch cartoons. Our parents called it different learning styles. I called it a preview of the next 3 decades. By the time I hit 25, I had my MBA from Wharton, a studio apartment in Philadelphia with actual furniture instead of milk crates, and a consulting job that made my student loans look almost manageable. I worked 70-hour weeks, analyzing market trends, building client presentations, and learning to smile through passive-aggressive boardroom wars. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Every promotion, every bonus, every, Evelyn, we'd like you to lead this project, I earned it with spreadsheets and sleep deprivation. George, meanwhile, was earning a reputation as the guy with big ideas and zero follow-through. At 25, he was still living in mom and dad's basement, convinced his food truck concept, Korean barbecue fusion, because apparently the food truck market wasn't saturated enough, would make him the next big thing. He designed logos, he taste-tested recipes in mom's kitchen, he even bought a used truck off Craigslist for $8,000, mom and dad's money, naturally, and painted it fire engine red. The truck never served a single customer. George got distracted by a revolutionary app idea, a dating platform exclusively for dog owners called Positive Connections. I wish I was making this up. He spent 6 months on that, burned through another $12,000 in investor money from dad's golfing buddy who clearly didn't golf for the business advice, and abandoned it the moment he realized coding required actual coding. Then came the crypto phase. Oh, the crypto phase. George discovered Bitcoin at the worst possible time, right after Elon Musk's tweets sent it to the moon, and decided he was a financial genius. He'd text me screenshots of his portfolio at midnight. Just made $4K an hour. Who needs a real job? I'd text back, cool, save some for taxes. He never did. Our parents? They funded every crash and called it believing in your children. They'd frown at George's failures over Sunday pot roast, sigh deeply, and then quietly transfer another few thousand into his account. Meanwhile, I'd show up with news of a promotion or a new client, and Dad would grunt, "That's nice, sweetie," before asking George about his latest scheme. I stopped expecting applause. I started expecting invoices. But then, 4 years ago, something shifted. I was driving back from a client meeting in Scranton. Yes, that's Scranton. And no, I didn't see Dunder Mifflin. when I took a wrong turn down a gravel road and stumbled upon a property sale. An old farmhouse, peeling paint, overgrown lawn, and a barn with a hand-painted sign, estate sale. Everything must go. I wasn't planning to stop, but then I saw her through the barn's open door. A 1969 Porsche 911S, Bahama yellow, covered in dust like a museum piece someone forgot to curate. I walked into that barn like I was walking into a cathedral. The car sat on cinder blocks, her tires flat, her engine exposed like open-heart surgery abandoned mid-procedure. But even under the grime, she was stunning. Those curves, that color, the way the afternoon light hit her hood and made her glow like melted gold. She was my husband's project, a voice said behind me. I turned to find an older woman, maybe 70, holding a coffee mug with a faded Cornell logo. Her name was Ruth, and her husband, a mechanical engineer, had bought the Porsche in 1983 with dreams of restoring it. He'd worked on it every weekend for 5 years, then got sick, pancreatic cancer. He died before he could finish. I don't know anything about cars, Ruth said, her voice soft. But Harold loved this one, said she had good bones. She paused, looking at me. You look like someone who finishes things. I bought the car for $38,000, half my savings. I promised Ruth I'd bring her back to life. And for the first time in years, I wasn't doing something because it made sense on a spreadsheet. I was doing it because it made sense to me. The restoration became my sanctuary. Every Saturday, I'd drive to my garage, a climate-controlled space I rented specifically for this project because there was no way I was parking a $150,000 potential in my parents' driveway next to George's abandoned food truck. I'd blast Bruce Springsteen or Fleetwood Mac, roll up my sleeves, and disappear into the work. I learned to gap spark plugs, rebuild carburetors, source original Fuchs wheels from a collector in Munich who only communicated via fax. Yes, fax. Apparently Germans don't trust email when it comes to Porsche parts. I bled on that car. I cried over that car when a transmission seal failed at 11 p.m. on a Sunday and I had to start over. I poured $107,000 and 1,000 hours into that car. And when I finally turned the key and heard that flat six engine purr, smooth, powerful, perfect, I sat in the driver's seat and wept. She was appraised at $145,000, but she was priceless. Then, 3 months ago, Singapore called. My firm was negotiating a merger with a tech conglomerate. $300 million on the table, the kind of deal that makes or breaks careers. If I closed it, I'd make partner before 40, the youngest in the firm's history. I kissed the Porsche's hood. Yes, I'm that person. Locked the garage, set the alarm system to paranoid, and texted my parents, off to Singapore, back in 3 weeks, behave. I should have known better. Success doesn't just make you a target, it makes you an ATM. And 8,000 miles away, the people who were supposed to protect me decided they were their emergency fund. Singapore in September is like being wrapped in a wet wool blanket while someone points a hairdryer at your face. I was on day 9 of the merger negotiation, sitting in a glass-walled boardroom on the 42nd floor of a building that looked like it was designed by someone who really, really loved triangles. Across from me sat 6 executives from TechCore Asia, all impeccable suits and unreadable expressions, waiting for me to present our final compliance framework. I was mid-sentence, something about regulatory alignment and cross-border data protocols, the kind of jargon that makes normal people's eyes glaze over, but makes CFOs lean forward, when my phone buzzed on the table. I ignored it. You don't check texts when there's $300 million in the line. It buzzed again. Then again. The lead negotiator, a woman named Priya with the sharpest eyeliner I'd ever seen, glanced at my phone, then at me. Please, she said, her voice polite but pointed, if it's urgent. I smiled apologetically, flipped the phone over, and felt my stomach drop into my shoes. 3 messages from Natasha, my business partner, and the only person I'd trusted with my spare house key. Evelyn, I stopped by to water your plants. Your garage door is wide open. The Porsche is gone. Should I call the police? For exactly 3 seconds, my brain short-circuited. The words were English, I understood English, but somehow they weren't computing. The Porsche is gone. Gone where? Gone how? Cars don't just evaporate. Cars don't sprout legs and wander off looking for adventure. Ms. Hugo? Priya's voice cut through the static in my head. Is everything all right? My mouth was moving, but my brain was 8,000 miles away, standing in an empty garage, staring at a space where $145,000 and 4 years of my life used to be. I'm so sorry. There's an emergency. I need 5 minutes. I walked out of that boardroom with the kind of forced calm you use when you're absolutely certain you're about to lose your mind, but refuse to do it in front of witnesses. I made it to the hallway, found a quiet corner near the elevators, and called Natasha. She picked up on the first ring. Evelyn, I'm so sorry. I didn't want to panic you, but... Tell me everything. My voice was steady. Too steady. The kind of steady that comes right before a complete meltdown. You came by this morning to water your succulents, like you asked. The front door was fine, locks intact, no signs of break-in. But when I walked past the garage, the door was wide open. Not forced open, just open. And the Porsche wasn't there. She paused. Evelyn, the alarm panel inside the garage, it was disarmed. Not smashed, not bypassed, disarmed with the code. Professional theft doesn't disarm your alarm. Professional theft doesn't have your code. I said, send me a photo. 30 seconds later, my phone lit up with an image that made my blood turn to ice water. The garage door, wide open, like a mouth mid-scream, the empty space where my car should have been, and there on my workbench was the hook where I kept my spare key for emergencies. Empty. This wasn't a burglary. This was someone who had access, someone who knew where I kept things, someone who knew I was 8,000 miles away and couldn't stop them. I called my parents. Straight to voicemail. Dad's cheerful recorded voice, "You've reached Jim and Caroline Hugo. We're probably out enjoying life. Leave a message." I call again. Voicemail. I called my childhood home landline, the number they had since 1993, because Dad refused to let go of the past. It rang 12 times. No answer. The dread settled into my chest like wet cement. I opened my email, my texts, my everything, looking for some explanation, some message that said, "Don't worry, we moved your car for totally legitimate reasons and definitely didn't betray you in the most spectacular way possible." Nothing. Then, because the universe has a sick sense of humor, I opened Instagram. I don't even know why. Muscle memory? Masochism? But there it was, posted 7 hours ago on George's story. A photo of champagne bottles on a table, Moet and champagne, because, of course, George wasn't a celebrate with beer kind of disaster. Behind the bottles, a blurry background that looked suspiciously like Mom and Dad's dining room. The caption, "Big things happening. New investment opportunity coming through. Sometimes you gotta take risks to build generational wealth. Hashtag family first. Hashtag crypto life. Hashtag trust the process. Hashtag family first." I stared at those words until they blurred. Family first. The same family that ignored my calls. The same family that had access to my garage, my alarm code, my spare key. The same family that was apparently celebrating something while my car, my 4-year, $145,000 labor of love, was missing. I called Natasha back. Called the police. Report it stolen. I'm coming home. Evelyn, what about the merger? I looked back at the boardroom where 6 executives and a $300 million deal were waiting for me to return and pretend everything was fine. I'd worked my entire adult life for this moment. Partner before 40, youngest in the firm's history. But some things matter more than partnership tracks. I said, "Tell them there's a family emergency, because there's about to be." I booked the next flight to Philadelphia. 16 hours in the air, plenty of time to imagine every worst-case scenario and plan exactly what I was going to say when I showed up at my parents' house unannounced. Spoiler alert, they weren't ready. Nobody ever is when the doormat finally stands up. 16 hours in an airplane gives you a lot of time to think. Unfortunately, it also gives you a lot of time to catastrophize, rage plan imaginary conversations, and consume enough airplane coffee to fuel a small rocket. By the time I landed in Philadelphia, I had mentally rehearsed 17 different versions of the confrontation, each one ending with me being either devastatingly articulate or in handcuffs. Maybe both. I didn't go home. I didn't shower. I didn't even grab my suitcase from baggage claim. Just my carry-on and my fury. I got in an Uber that smelled like vanilla air freshener and regret and gave the driver my parents' address in Cherry Hill. It was Sunday, which meant one thing in the Hugo household: pot roast, passive aggression, and the kind of forced family bonding that would make a therapist rich. I arrived at 6:47 p.m. The driveway was full. Dad's Buick, Mom's Honda CR-V, and George's leased BMW that he absolutely could not afford. Through the dining room window, I could see them all sitting around the table like a Norman Rockwell painting titled "Functional Family, Definitely Not Hiding Grand Theft Auto." I didn't knock. I used my key. You know, the one they gave me for emergencies, back when I still believed emergency meant something other than George made bad choices again. The front door swung open, and I walked into the dining room like I was walking into a deposition. The scene was almost comically wholesome. Mom at the head of the table with her floral apron, Dad carving pot roast, George scrawling on his phone with a glass of red wine that probably caused more than my flight home. All three of them froze when they saw me. Mom's smile flickered like a faulty light bulb. Dad's knife hovered mid-slice. George looked up from his phone, and I watched in real time as his face cycled through confusion, recognition, and something that looked almost like guilt. Almost. "Evelyn!" Mom's voice was too bright, too cheerful, the vocal equivalent of someone throwing glitter at a crime scene. "Sweetie, we didn't know you were coming home. Isn't she supposed to be in Singapore, Jim?" "Singapore," I said, my voice flat, "where I was closing a $300 million merger until I got a very interesting message from Natasha about my garage being wide open and my car being gone." The silence that followed could have suffocated a small mammal. Dad set down the carving knife with exaggerated care, the way you'd set down a weapon when you know you're caught. "Evelyn, honey, we were gonna call you." "Were you?" It wasn't a question. "Before or after you pawned my car?" Mom's hand flew to her chest like she was clutching pearls she wasn't wearing. "Now, Evelyn, let's not be dramatic." "Dramatic?" I felt something cold and sharp crystallize in my chest. "Mom, my $145,000 car is missing. The car I spent 4 years restoring. The car I built with my own hands. And you think I'm being dramatic?" George finally spoke, setting down his wine glass with the careful precision of someone who knows he's already lost. "Evie, look, I can explain." "Oh, I'm dying to hear this." I pulled out a chair and sat down, crossing my arms. "Please, explain how my car ended up as collateral for whatever financial disaster you've created this time." Dad cleared his throat, attempting his reasonable patriarch voice, the one he used when he was about to justify something completely unjustifiable. George was in a tight spot. His cryptocurrency investments hit a margin call, and he needed $40,000 immediately or he'd lose everything. "So you stole my car?" "We didn't steal it," Mom protested, her voice rising. "We used the spare key you gave us for emergencies." "Right. Because George gambling away his rent money on Dogecoin definitely qualifies as an emergency." It wasn't gambling, George said, leaning forward with that earnest expression he'd perfected over 30 decades of disappointing people. It was a calculated investment. The market dipped temporarily, and I just needed liquidity to cover the margin call. If I'd been forced to sell, I'd have lost everything. The car was just sitting there, Evie. You barely drive it. And I figured you'd understand. Family helps family, right? I stared at him, actually stared, watching him talk himself deeper into a hole he couldn't see he was digging. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. You took my car without asking, without telling me, drove it to a con shop and used it as collateral for a loan so you could keep gambling on internet money? And you think I should be understanding about this? You would have said no if I'd asked. George's voice cracked with frustration. You always say no. Every time I need help, every time I'm on the verge of a breakthrough, you lecture me about financial responsibility and sustainable business models like you're my accountant instead of my sister. Because I am financially responsible, George. Because I don't use other people's property as my personal piggy bank. She's right, you know. Dad's voice was quiet now, deflated. But then he added, but she also barely drives that car. It's been sitting in storage for 4 years. What's the point of having something if you're not going to use it? And there it was, the twisted logic that had funded George's disasters for 30 decades. You have something, George needs something. Therefore, your something becomes George something. I stood up slowly, my hands pressed flat on the table. When I spoke, my voice was quiet, deadly quiet. You're right, George. I would have said no. But you know what I wouldn't have said no to? A conversation, a phone call, a text message saying, hey, Evie, I'm in trouble. Can you help? Because that's what family does. Family asks. Family doesn't break into your garage, steal your property, and then justify it with hashtags about generational wealth. We were gonna tell you, Mom said, tears welling up in her eyes. The crying defense, classic. We just didn't want to worry you while you were working. You didn't want to face consequences. I grabbed my purse. Where's my car, George? He swallowed hard. Angelo's pawn on Route 38. I got $40,000 on it, 25% interest. We have 30 days to pay it back or they auction it. 30 days? My hands were shaking. I shoved them in my pocket so they wouldn't see. You had no right. My voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through that dining room like a scalpel. My car was mine. The only thing in my entire life that was completely, totally mine. And you took it. Like it was nothing. Evelyn, please. Mom reached for my arm. I pulled away. No. No more Evelyn, please. No more Evelyn understand. No more Evelyn sacrifice. I walked towards the door, and Dad's voice boomed behind me. So that's it. You're just gonna walk out after everything we've done for you? After we raised you, put you through school? I turned around one last time. You didn't put me through school. I have $87,000 in student loans to prove it. And everything you did for me, I've repaid 1,000 times over by watching you bail him out while I handled my own life like an adult. George stood up, his voice desperate. Evie, come on. You'd have done the same for me. I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something inside me, finally, irrevocably break. You're right, George. I would have helped you. All you had to do was ask. I walked out the door and didn't look back, even when I heard Mom crying, even when Dad shouted something about ungrateful and selfish. The Uber driver didn't ask why I was shaking. He just turned up the radio and drove. Some bridges you burn, some bridges burn themselves. The meeting at Delilah's office was scheduled for 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. I arrived at 9:45 with 2 copies of the repayment agreement, a recording device, legal in Pennsylvania, thank you very much, and the kind of cold determination usually reserved for corporate hostile takeovers. Delilah's office was all dark wood and leather chairs, the kind of place that whispers, "You're about to sign something that will change your life," before you even sit down. She greeted me with a firm handshake and a look that said she'd seen 1,000 family implosions, and mine wasn't even in the top 10. My parents arrived at 9:58, Dad in his serious business polo shirt, Mom clutching her purse like it was a life preserver. George slouched in behind them looking like he'd aged 5 years in 3 days. Good. Maybe consequences had that effect. They sat across from me at the conference table, and for a moment, nobody spoke. The silence was so thick you could have cut it with Delilah's letter opener. Dad broke first. "Evelyn, before we start, I think we need to talk about—" "Mr. Hugo," Delilah interrupted, her voice pleasant but immovable. "This isn't a conversation. This is a contract signing. Your daughter has offered you an alternative to criminal prosecution. I'd suggest you take it." Dad's face reddened. "Now, wait just a minute. We're family. Surely we can work something out that's more reasonable. Maybe a longer payment timeline or—" "This isn't a negotiation," Delilah said, sliding the contract across the table. "It's a consequence." Mom flinched like she'd been slapped. George stared at the document like it was written in ancient Sumerian. Dad's jaw clenched so hard I thought he might crack a molar. "Evelyn," George's voice was small, pleading. "Come on, this is insane. I'll pay you back, I swear. You know I will. Just give me time." "Your promises expired when you stole my car." I didn't raise my voice. Didn't need to. The words landed like stones in still water. "But you're my brother." "And I'm the person you robbed." Mom's eyes filled with tears, the weapon she'd wielded my entire childhood, the guilt grenade she'd lob whenever she wanted compliance. "Evelyn, please, you're destroying this family. Is that really what you want, to tear us apart over a car?" Something hot and sharp flared in my chest. "I'm destroying the family? I'm destroying it." I leaned forward, my voice steady but lethal. "You destroyed it when you chose his crisis over my consent. When you decided my 4 years of work, my $145,000, my trust was worth less than his latest get-rich-quick disaster. Don't you dare put this on me." "We were trying to help him," Mom's voice broke. "By stealing from me. Great parenting strategy, Mom. Really top-tier stuff." Dad slammed his hand on the table. "That's enough. We're your parents, Evelyn. You will show us some respect." "Respect?" I laughed, cold and sharp. "You want respect? Sign the contract. Respect is a two-way street, Dad, and you three turned it into a dead end." Delilah tapped her pen on the contract. 48 hours, folks. That's the deadline. Sign now or Miss Hugo files a police report at 10 a.m. on Thursday. Grand theft auto, unauthorized property use, and fraud. New Jersey doesn't play games with property crimes over $100,000. George go pale. "Evie, they could go to jail. Is that really what you want?" I met his eyes. What I wanted was for you to ask. What I needed was for you to respect me. What you gave me was betrayal. So yeah, George, if jail is what it takes for you to learn that actions have consequences, I'm okay with that. Mom sobbed. Dad looked like he wanted to flip the table. George looked like he might throw up. "Sign," I said, "or don't. But if you don't, I walk out of here and straight to the police station." Dad grabbed the pen first, his hand shaking with barely controlled rage. He signed his name with the kind of aggressive scrawl that probably tore the paper. Mom followed, tears dripping onto the signature line. George was last, his signature tiny and defeated. Delilah collected the contracts, made copies, and handed one set to me. "Pleasure being business with you all. First payment is due in 2 weeks." We walked out of that office in silence. No goodbyes, no apologies. Just the echo of expensive shoes on marble floors and the weight of burned bridges. The scramble started immediately. Dad called me that night. I didn't answer, but he left a voicemail. They were selling the rental property in Atlantic City, the one they'd bought as an investment 15 years ago and rented to college kids who trashed it annually. They'd get maybe $180,000 if they were lucky. It wouldn't be enough. George liquidated everything. The leased BMW, returned early with penalty fees. His gaming setup, the $4,000 custom PC, the curved monitors, the racing chair, sold on Facebook Marketplace for a fraction of its value. His crypto portfolio cashed out at a 60% loss because the market had tanked and his margin calls had multiplied like rabbits. I didn't feel sorry for him. I felt relieved. Like watching someone finally hit rock bottom after years of ricocheting off the walls on the way down. Mom called twice. I let it go to voicemail 2 times. She wanted to meet for coffee, to talk things through, to heal as a family. Translation: she wanted me to forgive them without them actually changing. I deleted the messages. On day 23, 7 days before the pawn shop's deadline, I got the call from Delilah. They've paid. Full amount. Your car's waiting. I drove to Angelo's pawn with Natasha in the passenger seat because Natasha understood that some victories require bubbles. The pawn shop smelled like desperation and old cologne. Angelo himself, a man who looked like he'd seen every bad decision humanity had to offer and profited for most of them, handed me the keys with a knowing smirk. She's out back, untouched. I don't mess with classics. I walked through the lot, past motorcycles and jet skis and someone's probably stolen sound system, and there she was. My Porsche, Bahama yellow, gleaming in the afternoon sun like she had been waiting for me. I ran my hand over the hood, checked the interior, turned the key. The engine purred to life, smooth and perfect, like she had never left, like the last 23 days had been a bad dream. Natasha climbed in beside me, popped the champagne, and poured it into plastic cups. We toasted in silence to boundaries, to consequences, to never being a doormat again. I drove that car out of the pawn shop lot with the windows down and Fleetwood Mac blasting, and for the first time in 3 weeks, I felt like myself again. Whole, unbroken, mine. Turns out, you can close a $300 million merger from a coffee shop in Philadelphia while your family implodes in real time. Who knew? I finished the Singapore deal remotely, working 18-hour days across time zones that made my circadian rhythm weep. Priya and her team were understanding, or at least professionally polite, about my family emergency. 3 weeks after the contract signing at Delilah's office, the merger closed. TechCore Asia got their American expansion, my firm got their commission, and I got a corner office with my name on the door and the title partner on my business cards. The youngest partner in the firm's history, at 36, while simultaneously prosecuting my own family. My boss, Rita, called it demonstrating grace under pressure. I called it spite as fuel. Both were accurate. The partnership came with a raise, a better parking spot, and the kind of professional validation I'd spent 15 years chasing. I celebrated by taking Natasha to dinner at the fanciest steakhouse in Philadelphia, where we ordered wine that cost more than my first car and toasted to boundaries, consequences, and the death of martyrdom. To never being a doormat again, Natasha said, raising her glass. I corrected, to doormats who lawyer up. We clinked glasses, and for the first time in a month, I actually felt like smiling. George, meanwhile, was learning what the rest of the world calls employment. Broke, humbled, and facing the reality that no amount of charm could unliquidate his crypto portfolio, he did something I never thought I'd see. He got a real job. Medical device sales. Of all things. I heard about it through Mom because even though we weren't speaking, she was apparently incapable of not updating me via passive-aggressive Facebook posts and messages to distant relatives, who then felt obligated to check in on me. George had taken a position at a company that sold surgical equipment to hospitals. Base salary plus commission, 40-hour weeks, performance reviews, the whole terrifying package of adult accountability. And here's the kicker. He was good at it. Turns out all that charm that he'd wasted on convincing people to invest in doomed ventures actually worked when applied to a legitimate product. Doctors liked him. Hospital administrators trusted him. Within 6 months, he was one of the top performers on his team. Within a year, he'd been promoted to regional manager. I didn't hear this from George directly. We still weren't speaking. But Natasha, who has a talent for gathering intel, showed me his LinkedIn update. Excited to announce my promotion to regional sales manager. Grateful for this opportunity to grow and prove myself. Hashtag new chapter. Hashtag earned not given. No cryptocurrency hashtags. No champagne bottles. No hashtag family first. Progress, apparently, looks like humility and a 401k. 5 months after the Porsche incident, I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten, my mother's looping cursive on cream-colored stationery that probably came from a box she'd had since 1987. Dear Evelyn, my father and I have been going to therapy. We're working on understanding why we enabled George for so long and why we took advantage of your success instead of celebrating it. We can't undo what we did, but we're trying to do better. We'd like to see you when you're ready. No expectations, just coffee. Love, Mom. I read it 3 times. Put it in a drawer, read it again a week later. 2 weeks after that, I texted her. Coffee, Saturday, 10 a.m., public place, 1 hour. We met at a diner off Route 70, the kind with vinyl booths and waitresses who call everyone hun. Mom looked older, more tired. Dad looked smaller somehow, like consequences had shrunk him. They didn't make excuses, didn't deflect. Dad apologized for dismissing my anger. Mom apologized for weaponizing guilt. They told me about their therapist, a woman named Dr. Reeves, who'd apparently spent 6 sessions unpacking 3 decades of dysfunctional family dynamics. She said we treated you like a resource instead of a daughter. And she was right, Mom said quietly, stirring her coffee without drinking it. I didn't forgive them. Not yet. But I listened. And when the hour was up, I didn't storm out. I just said, if we're going to rebuild this, it's on my terms. Scheduled visits, no financial discussions, no surprises. And if George ever asks me for money, we're done. Dad nodded. Understood. It wasn't a hallmark moment. It was a negotiation. But at least it was honest. A year after the theft, almost to the day, we gathered for Thanksgiving at my parents' house. I arrived in the Porsche, polished to mirror shine, and parked it prominently in the driveway where everyone could see it. A reminder, a boundary, a symbol. George was already there, helping Dad set up folding chairs. He looked up when I pulled in, and for a moment we just stared at each other through the windshield. Then he walked over. She looks good, he said, quietly, nodding at the car. She does. I'm glad you got her back. Me too. He shoved his hands in his pockets, looking younger than 30, more vulnerable than I'd ever seen him. Evie, I need to say something, and I need you to know I mean it. I crossed my arms, waiting. You saved me by not saving me. If you'd just forgiven me, bailed me out like Mom and Dad always did, I'd still be the same screw-up, blaming everyone else for my failures. But you didn't. You held me accountable, and I hated you for it. But I grew up. Finally. I said, good. Don't waste it. He nodded, his eyes wet. I won't. Dinner was awkward, but not hostile. We talked about safe topics, George's sales numbers, my latest client, Mom's book club. No one mentioned cryptocurrency or pawn shops or lawyers. The Porsche sat outside, like a gorgeous yellow elephant in the room, and no one touched it. After dessert, I drove home alone, windows down, taking the long way through back roads I'd driven 1,000 times. The engine hummed beneath me, smooth, powerful, mine. I thought about Ruth, the widow who'd sold me this car with a blessing and a prayer. I wondered if Harold would have been proud of what I'd done with it. Not just the restoration, the reclamation. I pulled into my garage, my climate-controlled, alarm-protected, absolutely no one else has access garage, and sat in the driver's seat for a long moment with my hands on the wheel. I had spent 4 years restoring a car, teaching myself to rebuild engines, source parts, match paint, bring something broken back to life. It took one betrayal to restore myself, to learn that boundaries aren't cruelty, that consequences aren't punishment, that saying no doesn't make you selfish, it makes you whole. I kissed the steering wheel. Yes, I am still that person, turned off the engine, and locked the garage behind me. Some things are worth fighting for. Some things are worth restoring. And some things, like your self-respect, are worth never compromising on again. So that's what happens when you finally stand up to the people who've been using your success as their safety net. Now I want to hear from you. Team Evelyn or Team She Went Too Far? Drop your honest thoughts in the comments, and if you've ever had to set brutal boundaries with family, share your story. Hit subscribe if you want more narratives about people who refused to stay silent, and turn on notifications so you never miss when I post, because stories like this, they're everywhere, and someone needs to tell them.